Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. It's the second webinar in the AVO webinar series. This one is called How to Build Trust and Credibility. And my name's Alex, so I'm the founder of Amazing Vegan Outreach. And Amazing Vegan Outreach is a nonprofit organization focused on animal rights and specifically on supporting animal rights activists with learning and development opportunities. I come from a professional background in corporate sales and corporate sales training. And so a lot of the trainings that I do, whether it's in person or in the webinars, are based on a lot of the knowledge that I picked up over my career, and as well as my experience as an activist in animal rights for the last 4 years. So yeah, let's kick it off here. Let me see if I can get the slides going. Perfect. So yeah, before we kick it off here, I just want to talk a little bit about different outreach styles, and maybe more specifically talk about what outreach style we choose to use when engaging people on the street at different outreach events, whether it's a Cube of Truth, Earthlings experience, VR outreach, even if we're flyering and talking to people, or if we're talking to friends and family. And what I've found happens very often is that people, activists, vegans, we don't often make a conscious decision as to a specific outreach style. So what ends up happening a lot is that we default to what's a natural conversation style when it comes to topics like veganism, like animal rights, where we may not agree with the other person, and it tends to get into a debate format. And we talked about this in the last webinar pretty extensively about different outreach styles, but the most common one that you'll find yourself kind of falling into, or if you're observing other people on YouTube or Facebook videos, is kind of this debating approach where someone will bring up a point, or you'll bring up points for veganism and for animal rights, and people will bring up counterpoints, and you're kind of going back and forth in what often happens to be like two monologues. So each person is kind of focused on saying their piece, and we fail to establish a dialogue where people are actually listening, responding, and communicating with each other. So what I hope to inspire, not just through this webinar, but through all of the work that I do through Amazing Vegan Outreach, is to inspire people to consciously choose a style. So to research and think about the pros and cons of the different styles, and hopefully, like me, I obviously promote this type of style, which is the coaching approach. And when you think about what coaching is a lot like this little diagram here. I'm just getting a message on my screen saying my internet connection is unstable, so that's not good. I hope that it's not affecting the quality of the webinar. So sorry about that if it is. But yeah, the coach approach is basically taking someone's thoughts and facilitating a process where they can clarify those thoughts, where they can explore them, where they can connect with their own values, let's say, where they can examine their own personal actions, what they're currently doing, figure out if their actions are aligned with their values, and if not, help them align those actions with those values. And it's been proven that the coaching approach, or coaching, is one of the best ways to inspire and motivate people to actually take or to create, what's the word I'm looking for? Behavior change. So it's the reason why I take that approach. It's the reason why I use that approach a lot when I was managing people and managing sales teams. It was a way for people to figure out what they wanted to do and figure out their own path to getting to that point. And they would even figure out ways to hold themselves accountable to those goals. So probably one of the main reasons why I also choose the coach approach is because of this quote, which, if you're familiar with the work that I do, if you've ever attended, if you attended the first webinar or any of the workshops, I talk about this a lot. And it's that people are usually more convinced by reasons they've discovered themselves than by those found out by others. And the short way to remember that is that people believe what they say, not what they hear. And if people believe what they say and not what they hear, then if we're the ones who are constantly talking and constantly sharing information with them and basically trying to teach them, it's going to kind of go in in one ear and out the other ear, if it even gets in one ear. Or sometimes we're going to, our message is going to fall on deaf ears for a few reasons that are going to come up here. So when we talk about coaching, I'd like to talk about what we need, what kind of environment we need to set up, what things we need to actually coach people effectively. So the first thing that we need is a willing participant. So we actually need someone that is willing to speak with us and willing to engage in this dialogue. And if we think about street outreach, one of the reasons why I think Anonymous for the Voiceless and Cubes of Truth have been so effective is because we have as willing of a participant as possible when they're stopping, they're voluntarily stopping and watching this video. And most of the times when we approach people to speak to them, they're interested in what's happening and they're open to kicking off a conversation. As opposed to trying to flag people down on the street and kind of engage them, in a conversation that they may not be willing to participate in. When it comes to friends and family, I will say that what I've found to be the most effective is purposely creating an environment where you can sit down and talk face to face, and it's not one of these spontaneous conversations that just kind of comes up while you're at dinner. If someone wants to find out about why you're vegan or why you're an animal rights activist, my suggestion would be to ask them to book some time in their calendar, in their schedule, to meet with you, to go out for a meal, a vegan meal, or a drink, or a coffee, or whatever that is, to discuss and to share, with the intention of sharing information or discussing this topic. So purposely creating that. The second one is rapport and trust, which we're going to dive into quite a bit in this webinar. So building a sort of relationship with that person where it's based on mutual trust and respect. I'm not going to talk about that too much right now because we're going to talk about that a lot in this webinar. Positive intentions. I think this is really, really important to engaging someone in a conversation where they're open to receiving new information, to exploring their own thoughts and opinions and ideas, and open to change. So I remember when I was coaching people, like performance coaching or career coaching, in my role as a sales director, we would sit down and I would always tell people what my intentions were behind this conversation. I would tell them that I was hoping to maybe help provide some clarity for them. I was going to help them, think about some of the challenges maybe that they're facing, think about some of their goals, and help them in road mapping a plan for that. So I'm not suggesting that we should necessarily do that, when we're out on the street talking to someone, but at the very least, having positive intentions, and again, we'll talk about this more within this webinar, but actually having those positive intentions within ourselves as we're speaking with people, I think is very, very key to being able to motivate people. And the last one is communication skills. So I think that it's very important that we invest time into understanding what good communication skills are. There are lots of different communication frameworks. There's lots of great books on communication that you can find at your local bookstore or through Kindle or however you kind of consume that. But exploring and understanding what that means and then practicing. So choosing some form of a communication framework and practicing the heck out of that, because a lot of times good communication doesn't come naturally to us. If it did, we wouldn't have so many arguments and debates. And, I think a lot of relationships, whether they're, romantic relationships or family relationships or work relationships, suffer because of breakdowns in communication. And what's the purpose? So what's the purpose of building rapport and building that connection with someone? And I think most importantly, this image does a good job of highlighting why it's so important. It's that we have egos, right? Both people involved in this conversation have egos. You know, if you're vegan, if you're an animal rights activist, or if you're non-vegan, what often happens is this clash of egos, right? And there's this expression that goes, it's the ego in oneself that recognizes the ego in another. And it's really important that, one, we manage our own egos to make sure that we aren't getting defensive in that conversation, and that we focus on protecting that fragile ego that exists in that other person, especially when they're faced with such a sensitive topic. Okay, so this idea of the coaching approach as opposed to a debating approach is all about being sensitive to the ego needs of other people. I also want to talk about the idea of a locus of control, which refers to, I remember when I was learning about emotional intelligence, this was in some organizational behavior course I took in university a long time ago, but I never forgot this idea of locus of control. And the locus of control basically refers to one's perception of whether one has control over one's destiny, or whether destiny controls your life, right? So an internal locus of control means you have control over your destiny. An external locus of control means that kind of things happen to you and affect you. And I want us to think of the fact that as a coach, if we assume the role of an outreacher and as a coach, that we are conscious that we have a very strong potential to impact that conversation, to actually create a positive conversation, or to create an environment where the conversation can actually kind of go off the rails and become sidetracked and become contentious and become argumentative. So when people do get defensive about this topic, I hope that our first instinct is to look at ourselves as to what we're doing that might be causing that person, or might be even making it easier for that person to get defensive, and not blaming them, because it's natural for people to get defensive. You know, we all get defensive. I had a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine where I recognized myself getting defensive because, you know, my ego is triggered. And so as the person who's assuming the coaching role, as the person who knows all of this, I want us to know that we have the power to help people, not to, you know, we can't change people, but we can definitely help them and create a situation where they're not getting defensive. This is a quote from one of my favorite authors, Dr. Seuss, and it kind of refers to this idea. So you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself in any direction you choose, you're on your own, and you know what you know. You are the guy or girl who'll decide where to go. And it just highlights, like, we have the power to direct this conversation however we want. And it's really important that we do direct this conversation where we want, and we don't allow, you know, the defensive, the natural defensiveness that comes up with us to steer that conversation. Okay. This is the framework. Anyone who's gone through the Mastering Vegan Outreach workshop knows that this is the full framework for the workshop. So this is what we spend 2 days working on in the full workshop. And we're going to really focus on the first step here, the opening step, which is building trust and credibility. And I do want to point out that although it's the first step in this framework, it's one step that never ends. We should always be taking every opportunity to build trust and credibility and rapport with this person. Okay, and I'll kind of go into what that means right now. So here's my analogy. I've said this quite a bit before, and I will repeat it again now, that building rapport for me is like, it's like managing a bank account, okay? Or let's call it a trust account. So when you first meet somebody, when you walk up to them on the street, let's say you're talking to someone at a Cube of Truth, and the bank account that you have with this person, this trust account, starts off at empty, okay? There's nothing invested in there. And from the moment they turn and they look at you, and they see you and they get a, a nice smile when you're introducing yourself, and they get a positive vibe from you, and you're dressed appropriately for that event. You're clean, you don't smell bad, whatever that is. When they get that positive vibe from you, it's going to be like you're making these like little investments into that trust account. Okay. And people are subconsciously and unconsciously, they're trying to size you up, and they're trying to figure out, can I trust this person? Is this person here to like do me harm? Do I want to talk to this person? And all the things that we're doing, which we're going to discuss coming up right now, it's like you're making these deposits. And the reason why it's so important to make these deposits is because there's going to be times through this conversation where, it's not going to go perfectly smooth. Maybe that defensiveness kicks in on their side, or maybe on your side. Maybe, they're going off on a tangent and you have to interrupt them. And you might have to make a withdrawal from that trust account, right? And if you've done well enough to build up the funds or the investments in that account, well, you can afford to make a withdrawal without fully harming that relationship. The problem is when you haven't, invested enough and you start making multiple withdrawals, that's when something like this happens. So I want you to take a look at this. I love this meme. I just came across this today, so I thought I'd include it in the webinar. You think that you're trying to build this really good relationship with someone, and all of a sudden, you realize, oh crap, I don't have that much money invested, and the conversation breaks down into a debate, into an argument. And sometimes what happens is that person actually ends up walking away from that conversation more convinced of the points that they were bringing up, because they were forced into defending their point of view. And I don't want people to feel like they have to defend themselves against what we're saying, okay? So here's an idea that we also talk about in the workshop, and it's the idea that I go into before I even approach someone. I go in with this mentality, okay? These circles represent two different worlds, okay? So one of them represents the animal rights activists world, so in other words, my world as an outreacher, and the other circle represents the world of the non-vegan, okay? And the way that I think about it is this. When we think about it from their point of view, right? And that's what's really important when you're coaching, is to approach this from the other person's point of view. So when you think about it from their point of view, their world has so many things in it, right? They have kids, family, they have a car, they have a house, they have, so many things on their mind. And here we are, these animal rights activists, maybe we're in the middle of the street with a cube, and all we're trying to do really is we're trying to fit our animal rights message into their world, okay? And when you approach this from a sense of humility, despite the fact that this topic is so important, we know how important this is, that it's literally life or death for, I was going to say billions, we know it's trillions of living sentient beings every year, okay? I'm not saying how this is not important, but to that other person, this isn't something that they think about regularly. It's not something that they chose to think about that day. So approaching it from the point of view where if somebody's willing to have a conversation with me, whether it's at a cube, at work, it's a family member, I'm going to be grateful for that opportunity to speak to them and to hopefully coach them to move along and move closer to the point where they realize that going vegan makes a lot of sense for them, okay? I want to talk about something that is instrumental and key in building rapport with people. And I mentioned communication earlier. This is something that touches on the way that we communicate with others, and more specifically, the way that our communication is perceived by them. So the 3 V's refer to the 3 ways that people perceive communication, and they look like this. People perceive our communication visually. So right now, for example, if you can see me on camera, then you can see my the things visually that I'm doing to communicate. You can hear my vocal tone. You can hear different things about the way that I'm speaking. And verbal refers to the actual words that I'm choosing to use, which all of those 3 make up your interpretation of this message, okay? And there was this there were some studies done by a professor in UCLA. His name is Dr. Albert Mehrabian. And what he did was I don't want to get into too much detail with this study, but he basically studied how people's perceptions can be altered, especially when there's a lack of congruency between these three, okay? And specifically when people were expressing feelings or emotions. And when there was a lack of congruency between the words that were being used, the way they were being said, and the visual cues, like specifically facial expressions, for example, this is what he found as far as the weighting that each of these components had on the message. So primarily, people use facial expressions and things that they can see and the tone of voice that you use to perceive the intent and the actual, their interpretation of that message. And the reason why this is important, and although it's not relevant to every single thing that we say because we're not always communicating these specific things, but to me what this does is it highlights the importance of communicating effectively on all three levels, because people can normally see us, when we're at a cube of truth, they can definitely see us. They can hear the way that we're speaking. And of course, they're listening to the words that we say. And I'm going to put up a chart right here. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things that we can do on each of these categories to try to build trust and try and build credibility early on and throughout the conversation. So let's just go down the list, and I'm going to start with the visual, because I do believe that it is the most important, not just because of those studies, but I recognize that some of the best speakers, like people that I like watching, whether it's on YouTube or famous orators from the past, they had this way, especially their facial expressions, of emphasizing and conveying the true passion and meaning behind what they're saying. So let's talk about some things that we can do visually, specifically at outreach events, at cubes, okay? And you can apply these however you think might fit to other situations. But I'll talk about cubes because they're the most common right now. So eye contact. Eye contact is something that obviously shows people you're paying attention. It's something that we should leverage for sure while we're communicating with people. And it's something that we should also make sure we're not doing too much of, because too much eye contact can also be a little bit intimidating. It can be creepy if done in the wrong way, but it can be intimidating in the sense that eye contact is good because it shows that you're paying attention to the person. However, sometimes people need space. They need time to process and to think and to come up with answers to the really good questions that you've asked them. So sometimes looking away from them and maybe focusing on the screen that's in front of you is really powerful to give them that time and that space that they need to think and to answer. Smiling. So I mentioned this, early on in the conversation, trying to smile when you first meet somebody. Have a positive look on your face when you're explaining, what's going on here. Hey, we're here with a group called Anonymous for the Voiceless. There's about 700 groups around the world like this. And what we do is we go on the streets and we share footage from the animal agriculture industry. Have you ever seen any footage like this before? And then you can kind of, go into a little bit more of a serious tone. And when you start asking them about, how do you feel when you see videos like this? Your tone can change. But if you notice, my facial expressions also change to match the tone of what I'm saying. And so that goes into facial expressions, Smiling is one thing. You can smile with your mouth, but you can also smile with your eyes, And I think your eyes really convey, there's something about the intention, your vibes, if you want to call it that really come through your eyes. So even though you might not have a smile on your face, your eyes can say a lot to someone. And yeah, anyway, I'm just thinking, and facial expressions, when you want somebody to feel a little bit sad or you want them to feel concerned, you can show that in your face when you're saying those things, so that it'll mirror what you're saying and what you're feeling. It'll emote through your facial expressions. And I think that's really, really important to keeping people engaged and to showing people how you're actually feeling about the topic that you're speaking about. Body language. open body language, not crossing your arms and leaning away from someone, maybe not leaning into them too closely where they feel like you're kind of encroaching on their personal space. Preferably, balanced, feet shoulder width apart, shoulders back, hands in front of you. If you speak with your hands, it's a great opportunity to do that. You can always make reference to the videos that they're seeing on the screen if you're talking to someone beside you. And when I say beside you, body position is another thing that kind of goes along that. Standing side by side with someone, I think probably a lot of people have already heard about this, but standing next to someone side by side, looking at the video together, so much more powerful than standing face to face, which is a much more confrontational approach. And if they're facing the video, if you walk up and stand in front of them, you're kind of blocking their view of the video. So I'm a big believer in standing side by side to mirror that idea that you're looking at this problem together. It just creates, again, a nice vibe to this conversation, like a collaborative approach, let's say, not a competitive one. Head tilt. This is one where I do an exercise in the Mastering Vegan Outreach workshop where I tell the participants to introduce themselves to each other without speaking. And when people are limited, without speaking, one person speaking and the other person listening and not speaking, so they're not allowed to speak while the other person is introducing themselves. And what I see all the time is people like tilting their heads when they're listening to someone. And that head tilt is kind of this universal sign for I'm paying attention, I'm listening. And if you think about other individuals that do that instinctively, think about dogs. If you ever make an interesting noise, or if you speak to some dogs will they'll tilt their head and when they're listening to you, right? They'll show you that they're paying attention by doing that. And it works very well with humans as well. You can always tilt your head and kind of have that interested kind of look in your facial expressions. And then head nodding. So along with the head tilt is nodding your head, where you can show someone that you're paying attention and that you're understanding what they're saying. And I also want to make sure that people don't equate head nodding to agreeing. Head nodding does not mean that you agree with what they're saying necessarily, because you can very easily disagree with what they're saying with the words that you choose to use right after. Or you can ask them questions to help them understand why whatever they're saying may not be the most correct or whatever that is. But head nodding for me is like, I'm listening to you, I'm acknowledging that I'm hearing you. I understand where you're coming from, and then you can also supplement that with feedback, with verbal feedback that you understand what they're saying, I notice I'm just kind of quickly seeing here that I'm just taking a quick peek at the comments as I'm speaking, that it's not, some people are finding a little bit of lag. That is going to happen for some people based on your internet connection. My internet connection looked really strong earlier when I tested it. I don't know if it's bouncing around. So if it is laggy, I apologize. There's nothing we can do about it right now. So I apologize. This will be recorded and it should be clear without any lag in it. So if it's really bad, you can rewatch whatever parts you missed. So I apologize. From the vocal, so the way that you say certain things, the inflection in your voice, meaning kind of the pitch of the kind of flow, the song maybe that your tone of voice creates. These are things that can add a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I don't want to say suspense, but a lot of dynamic, a lot of maybe charisma, I don't know, to the things that you say. And it makes it more interesting for people to listen to, as opposed to kind of this monotonous, flat tone where people would just kind of get bored if you're just talking like this and you're not really making a lot of effort to add emphasis into the words that you're saying. I don't know if you feel that difference, but a little bit of energy, a little bit of passion goes a long way in making people want to listen to what you're saying. The volume of what you're saying. So making sure that, one, you're speaking loud enough that the person next to you can hear what you're saying, that they don't have to kind of strain to hear it. And I think that the volume of your voice also corresponds directly to the confidence that you have, or at the very least, it's interpreted that way. You know, if I'm confident in what I'm saying, I don't mind other people overhearing what I'm saying. So when I'm speaking with someone at a Cube of Truth, you know, my voice is going to be loud enough for the person next to me to hear, but it's also going to be loud enough where if there are, you know, if there happen to be 3 or 4 people kind of standing around me, they'll also be able to hear what I'm saying. And we'll talk about confidence in a second, but the volume of your voice is really important to conveying that, and just making sure the person can hear you, right? It's really frustrating if you can't hear them or if they can't hear you in that conversation. So speak loud, speak, you know, be proud and confident in what you're saying. And the speed at which you speak. So I'm glad I put this in here for my sake as much as yours, because I'm somebody who gets really excited and passionate about topics like what we're talking about now. And I sometimes speak too quickly. I'm probably speaking too quickly right now for this webinar. So I apologize if I'm speaking too quickly. But yeah, it's something that we should consciously think about and maybe try our best to listen to ourselves, kind of go a little meta, go outside, observe this conversation. Are we getting too excited, or are we getting too heated? Or are we possibly not confident enough in what we're saying, and we feel like we have to speak so quickly because maybe this person might not get a chance to interrupt us if we speak really quickly? That's often what happens. You know, we feel like we have to kind of quickly talk and not stop so this person doesn't have a chance to interrupt. And on that note, by the way, if somebody ever wants to interrupt you, let them. Because we're not talking about this in this webinar, but there's something called poor listening habits, which everybody has. And what happens is if we are thinking about what we want to say next in this conversation, we fail to hear and we fail to listen to this other person. And the same thing goes the other way around. If somebody that you're speaking with wants to say something, right, to the point where they're itching and they're about to interrupt you, or they do interrupt you, if they don't get that chance to interrupt, if you don't let them interrupt you, then guess what they're going to be doing? They're just going to be waiting until you stop saying whatever it is that you're saying so they can say what's on their mind. And that's all they're waiting for. That's all they're thinking about. They're usually not listening to you. So let them interrupt, and, you know, be confident that if you're speaking slowly and someone needs to interrupt you, that's totally cool. Interrupt, and then come back to the point, come back to what you were saying before. Verbal. So verbal is the last one. These are the words that we choose to use, right? And there's kind of 2 points that I'll talk about on this one. So the first one is use their language. And by that, what I mean is try not to use what I call animal rights jargon, words that we use in our circles of vegans and animal rights activists. So, you know, one example of that, for example, would be like carnist or carnism, or might be like saying animal flesh instead of, you know, meat, stuff like that. Whenever we use animal rights jargon with people, it only serves to create a division between us. And I'm by no means saying that that it's incorrect to use those terms. In fact, I think it's really good. I shouldn't say good. I think it's very accurate to not use euphemisms, right? That makes sense. However, it can come across as condescending sometimes, you know, if said the wrong way. And if you do come across as condescending, or you say something that can be interpreted as being patronizing, it just drives a wedge between you. And for me, the most important thing is not driving a wedge between us. So I can find ways of saying things or explaining things, or what I've heard a term called like speaking in definitions. So instead of using the terms that you want to use, speak in the definition of what that term is. It's really powerful, and it doesn't lead to any confusion as to what that word might mean. The other one is non-inflammatory language, which is kind of related to that. And it's using terms like murder. Meat is murder, or dairy cows are raped, or this is an animal holocaust, or this is a holocaust. Despite the fact that these terms are accurate, okay? Again, I'm not saying that they're not right. Despite the fact that they're accurate, what we have to think about is using these terms going to help build rapport? Is it going to create a trusting, connection with that person? Or is it going to give them an opportunity maybe to get defensive and to say like, hey, wait, you can't compare, animals to humans, right? Because I've heard that before in my conversations, and I definitely used to use certain words, thinking if I use this kind of really accurate language to describe what's happening, then it's going to it's going to spark this this level of understanding, and usually it doesn't do that. Usually it leads to more defensiveness and a breaking connection. So that's my advice for building rapport and creating connection with someone, is avoiding that type of language, despite the fact that it's right. You can choose to be, I think you can choose to be effective as opposed to being right. And there's ways to do that. So yeah, if anybody has specific questions about that, throw that in the question section, and I'm happy to check that out or to address those at the end of the webinar. I talked about confidence. I think that confidence is something that's often misunderstood, and I want to talk about the importance of being confident, and not just being confident, but coming across as confident. And confidence and arrogance are often confused. And I want to make sure that we're not coming across as arrogant, that we aren't actually thinking in an arrogant way that we are superior to other people because we're vegan, that we are smarter than them, that they're stupid. That's not confidence. That's arrogance, and that's fueled by our own egos. What I mean by confidence is confident that the message that we're delivering is an accurate and important one, that the framework that we're choosing to use, and of course, in my case, it's a coaching framework, that it's the right approach and that it's an effective approach. Confidence in the fact that, I don't mean this person any harm. Confidence in the idea that if this person is aggressive towards me, if they're antagonistic, if they insult me or laugh at me, it's not going to bother me. In fact, I expect people to do that. I'm an animal rights activist, and I think anybody that's been doing this long enough, if you haven't been made fun of or insulted, you're probably not doing enough activism, because it's natural for people to get defensive. It's natural for people to I've had meat thrown at me on the streets while I was at a vigil. It's natural for people to get defensive, okay? And I want us to not be surprised by it. I want us as coaches to think about ways that we can help diffuse their egos, diffuse their defensiveness, lower it, as opposed to reacting to it and further triggering it, And again, is it our responsibility to manage other people's egos? No, it's not our responsibility. However, if we want to be effective at getting people to accept this message, it's a good idea to take that responsibility on. And when you can do that, you'd be surprised at the amazing results that you can get. So yeah, be confident in that approach and in your attitude towards these conversations. I want to talk about the golden rule. So a lot of people, I think around the world, this is kind of a universal rule. I know that some places don't call it the golden rule, but the golden rule, the way that I know it, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? So treat others the way that you would like to be treated, right? And I was going to say, I can't see you guys, but raise your hand if you think that's a good rule. Seems like a great idea, right? I think it comes from the Bible, probably lots of different, I learned this very early on in life, and I thought it was great. And now when I think about it as a coach, I think it's a horrible idea. I don't actually agree with the golden rule at all. And the reason why I don't agree with the golden rule is because it's very egotistical. It's very egocentric. It's very much like do unto others as you would like have done unto you. Treat others the way you would like, to be treated. Here's an idea that I came up with. I don't know if I developed this, but I kind of came up with this idea in my own head anyway, was the platinum rule, which is treat others the way they would like to be treated, and to do that, to treat others how they would like to be treated involves a little bit more work, right? Because we know how we want to be treated, but guess what? Not everybody wants to be treated that way. And especially when it comes to a coaching conversation, people are very different. They need different things from a coach and from a conversation. And I'm guilty. I know that I'm guilty of this, of sometimes giving people what I think they need based on what I would need if I were in that situation. An expression just came to my mind: be the vegan that you wish you had met when you weren't vegan. And there's a lot of truth to that. Like, I love that expression. Don't be judgmental. Don't be an asshole. Don't judge other people or put yourself on a higher level because you're so enlightened now. However, when it comes to coaching, I want us to think about, be the coach. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to have a really good sports coach or a life coach or a performance coach. By the way, side note, this is one of the services that I offer through Amazing Vegan Outreach is leadership coaching. And even I'll do like performance coaching if people want to review conversations that they've had, if they have them recorded. But when you coach people, you need to give them what they need. And here's an example of some things that people need. So depending on your personality style, depending on your social type, you might require, in order to make a decision, right? Because what we're hoping people do is that they accept new information, that they process that information, and that they make a decision to hopefully, change their actions, right? Align those actions with their values. So different types of people need different things. Some social styles need a lot of data and they need a lot of facts. So if you think about people who might ask you about the accuracy of the video footage that's being shown. So things like, so where was this footage recorded? When was it recorded? How long ago? So how relevant is this today? How many farms are like this? Is this just, are these just isolated incidents? Who recorded this footage? Maybe they're trying to figure out if there's a hidden agenda behind recording this. Like there's people who think in a very analytical way. I happen to not be one of these people, but when people start asking me for these things, as opposed to feeling like annoyed, which my instinct, because I'm not like this, might be to get annoyed that people are looking for all this detail. When I think about that as a coach now, it's like, oh, this is what this specific person needs to help them make a decision because they value their decision-making abilities. So when they make a decision, they want to make sure that it's the right one. And they probably want to be able to make sure that if they go home and tell their friends and family that they're now a vegan, that they have a lot of support, a lot of facts and data to back that up so they can prove why it's the right decision, right? Other people might need to feel a sense of control over this conversation, which might be a little difficult. You might get people who talk over you, who interrupt you, who are, trying to really guide this conversation themselves. So understanding how to play with that person in this conversation, and understand that they do need a little bit of that sense of control, that you give that up to them, might help them in pulling this information in gathering it and processing it. Recognition. So certain social types need recognition for the ideas that they've come up with. So if you're having a conversation and somebody gives you a really good point, or they come up with an idea themselves, and it's and they've come up with a good logical idea or something, sometimes they really value your recognition of that, saying, hey, wow, that's really cool that you thought of that. Or, yeah, you know what, that's amazing. I actually agree with you 100%. And people, certain social types really value that. Security is another one. Security is one that a very popular social type called cooperators, they really value the relationships, the personal relationships with people, including you as an outreacher, even if they've just met you on the street, they value this relationship that they're forming, and they don't want to do anything to threaten that or to end up in a conflict with you. So they might not express their objections to veganism, right? They might not express their actual point of view to you, and that's really dangerous as a coach, because they might walk away from you nodding and smiling and thanking you for the conversation. They'll take a card from you, and they'll be all happy, and you'll think, hey, that was awesome, and they'll walk away from you, and they won't do anything. They'll throw the card in the garbage, or maybe they'll just put it in their wallet and never look at it again. They won't go home and they won't watch a documentary, because they still have these hidden objections that they didn't feel safe telling you at that moment. So sometimes people need to feel safe that you're not going to come down on them hard, that you're not going to, make them feel stupid if they say something like, hey, I read an article that plants feel pain, and if our reaction is like, oh my God, plants feel pain, how stupid, even if we just show that with an eye roll, or we show a facial expression, that could really harm that rapport with that person. And if they get a sense that it's going to turn into that, they might not open up to you. So they might need that sense of security. So just a few things to think about when we're outreaching, and how different people need different things that we might not need. This is from a movie that I watched recently called Wonder. When given the choice between being right and being kind, choose kind. And I kind of want to just check the time first of all. Perfect. Okay. So I kind of want to start wrapping this up with the idea of when we're speaking with people about this topic, I know it's easy to get frustrated. I know that we feel that there's this balance that, that we understand on one side, there are, so many individuals, locked up in cages, suffering, being killed, being torn apart from their families and their friends. I get that. I get that. This person that we're talking to needs us to be super gentle with them. Okay. Normally, it's like, there's an idea that I heard a long time ago. Be hard on the problem, be soft on the people, And I don't think that we're compromising on the problem if we're soft on the people. If we're kind, if we're understanding, and we recognize that just because this person doesn't go vegan in this 5 or 10 or 15 or 20-minute conversation with us, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they're stupid. To me, it means that they're human, that they have the same human faults that a lot of us had before we were vegan. And I know people say, oh yeah, well, I just needed to see it once and I went vegan right away. That's amazing. It's amazing that we had that ability, that maybe who knows what happened in our lives to allow us to be that open. And maybe this person has things that they've experienced that shut them off or make them more closed, or their insecurities are bigger, their egos are bigger, whatever that is. And the more understanding we are, the more likely we are to get through to this person and help them make those connections. I want to ask you guys for support. All of the work that I do through the webinars, through the workshops, the one-on-one coaching is all offered as gifts to the animal rights community. This is the work that I do full-time. So if you want to support this, if you want to support more webinars, workshops, coaching for you or for any activist, please feel free to do so. There's no such thing as gifts that are too small. Like, there's 75 participants I see on this webinar. Like $1 a month on Patreon goes a long, long way. And I'm not just saying that. It really, really helps out. So I appreciate any support. Those are the links that you can use to provide gifts and to support the work that I do through Amazing Vegan Outreach. And I want to thank you guys for participating in this. My last motivational quote is also from Dr. Seuss. So, oh, the places you'll go. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. And your mountain is all of the people, all of the non-vegans who you'll talk to, who it might feel like you're climbing a mountain when it comes to talking to them. But be patient, be kind with them, and use some of the things that we talked about in this webinar to build, trust with them. It'll only help. It'll only help you get further along in those conversations. So thank you guys so much. At the bottom there, you see some links to the different social media channels. Please, if you haven't already, follow the Amazing Vegan Outreach Facebook page, the YouTube channel. My Instagram account is a great way to connect with me on more of like a personal level. But feel free to message me or to connect on any one of those. The QR code for anyone who has an iPhone, if you open your camera right now on your phone, you can scan that and it'll link you, I think, directly to the YouTube channel, to the where you can subscribe to see some videos. There's a brand new video that just came out, which is kind of interesting, called Boyfriend versus Girlfriend. And it's a great example of dealing with one of the most difficult objections to veganism, which is that they don't care. The guy didn't care about the suffering of animals. And it's actually quite surprising, some of the things that he says in there. And I want you to, if you get a chance, to watch it and think about the things that I was talking about within this webinar. And I don't know, it was the most effective that I could be. I didn't get very far with him, but I got a little bit. I got him to budge a little bit. So let me know what you think about that. Comment on the video maybe. And yeah, thank you guys for participating and for all of the work that you do.